I think I'm going to kick it all off. We're sorry for the couple of minutes of technical difficulties, but I assure you that this presentation and talk will be worth the wait. Um, this is Real Talk with Equal Rights Advocates, and we have a virtual series of really amazing conversations with the most compelling people in the country about pressing issues and recent and current events that relate to gender, racial, and economic justice. My name is Noreen Farrell, and I am the executive director. And our organization has been on the front line since 1974, really trying to build gender equity in all spheres, at school, work, the public sphere. And I think for women of color and gender expansive people and immigrant and low paid women and women with disabilities, these women are at the heart of our work because our progress is often blocked by the multiple forms of discrimination and bias and structural barriers that some face, getting the right jobs, getting the credit that they deserve, getting the pay they deserve. And so while we do this work across hundreds of industries, today we're going to look within to the practice of law. Equal Rights Advocates was founded by women lawyers. We work very closely with the great women that you're going to hear from today and major law firms across the country. And, look, if we can't get gender and race right in the legal profession, where can we? So I'm really honored to welcome our guests today. They're really powerhouse women in law. And we're going to dive right into that. We're going to focus on why women of color remain just 2% of equity partners in large law firms for the past 20 years, as they struggle with pay equity, originating credit, all of the factors that really hold them back in the practice of big law. And as we do this, I just want to remind our speakers and everyone with us of the real innovation in structural change that we're really seeing in other industries that needs to be embraced by every law firm in the country. I'm talking about pay audits, pay transparency, anti-racism work that really reveals how structures perpetuate inequities in all industries. I'm really now thrilled to pass the program on to our moderator, Drusilla Ramey, a woman who has really dedicated her entire career to exacting equity from the legal profession. She is our beloved chair of our board of directors of Equal Rights Advocates. She's Dean Emerita of Golden Gate School of Law. She's the recipient of the ABA Margaret Brent Lawyers of Achievement Award, former chair of the San Francisco Commission on the Status of Women, former executive director of the National Association of Women Judges. And while leading the Bar Association of San Francisco, she co-founded the Minority Counsel Program. And she really led the Bar Association to be the most aggressive bar in the nation to achieve gender, race, LGBTQ, and disability diversity. So she knows a thing or two about this topic, needless to say. And before I turn it over to you, I just want to let you know that Drew will be honored by Equal Rights Advocates at our upcoming gala, which will be virtual on November 13th. It'll feature Megan Rapinoe, Anita Hill, Dolores Huerta, and some other very notable guests that we're going to be proud to announce pretty soon. So I really want you to, everyone who's listening in, to please join us at that virtual event and join us in celebrating Drew, Equal Rights Advocates, and all the great people who make us strong. So over to you, Drew. Drew, you're on mute.
Anyhow, I just wanted to say we at Equal Rights Advocates and across this country are so fortunate to have Noreen Farrell as our executive director, who's just been absolutely extraordinary in making it a truly national organization that's really at the head of many how shall I say, projects and lawsuits and
rebel rousing
and models across this country to do something about the continuing inequality that we face. This clearly is a panel of groundbreaking women of color who are firsts in everything, it seems, in the law. And this will focus on their own personal experiences and their views on the findings and the future impact of a recently released ABA study, which is co-authored by two of our panelists and Dr. Destiny Peary as well, called Left Out and Left Behind, the Hurdles, Hassles, and Heartaches of Achieving Long-Term Legal Careers for Women of Color. Preliminarily, let me note that in all these years that I've been doing this, it seems like, and I don't know how many others feel this way, but it seems like we might be at a breakthrough moment with the Black Lives Matter movement and with these lawsuits that have, for the first time in the last few years, begun to be brought against law firms to deal with the lack of diversity of law firms. It does seem as if maybe we will have some impact on big law. On the other hand, of course, we have a president who's condemned and prohibited anti-racism training in federal employment, especially implicit bias training, as, quote, divisive anti-American propaganda and a sickness that cannot be allowed to continue. And he is not alone in his virulent opposition to even the most quotidian efforts to effect change. And so I think one of the things that when we get to the questions that I'd like to just mention is that the head of a very, very prestigious law firm a couple of years ago, when we were talking about implicit bias, which many today will allude to, said this to me. He said, well, Drew, he said, here at our firm, he says, we really don't have to worry about implicit bias all that much. He said, because we have so much explicit bias here in the firm. And I think that explicit bias is something that most programs in dealing with this program do not, with this problem, do not really deal with. And yet there does not exist a woman of color or any other woman, LGBTQ person, people with intersectional characteristics that doesn't know perfectly well that explicit bias continues to be a huge problem in the legal profession. So against that backdrop, I want to first introduce Eileen Letts. She'll give us a kind of a 5-minute flyover view of what this study was all about. And at that point, then, I will ask her a question that she indicated would bring out some of her own personal experiences and views the best. And after that, her sister panelists will jump in with some of their views on this. And then we will move on to the next panelist with a new question and so on. At the end, we will be taking questions from some of the people who have joined us today and get the panel's hit on that. And then Noreen will close. So with that, I will proceed to you, Eileen, and just introduce you. Eileen is a recipient of the ABA Margaret Brent Award and other awards too numerous to mention, especially in the Chicago area, where she is a premier civil trial attorney, partner, and chair of the litigation department at the firm of Zuber, Lawler, and Del Duca there in Chicago. She's a national leader of and a charismatic speaker about efforts to enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just in the profession, but in the whole society. And she served as the co-chair of the ABA President's Commission 360, and with Paulette was one of the co-authors of the study we are focusing on today. So Eileen, first, if you could give us just an overview of the study.
Absolutely. Thank you, Drew. I appreciate being able to participate in this panel today with one of my co-conspirators in life, Paulette Brown. The study, actually, this was supported and sponsored by the American Bar Association. To give you just a little backdrop on it, there was an original study called Achieving Long-Term Careers for Women in the Law. That was done under a previous president of the ABA, Hilary Bass, and that study dealt mainly, it had women of all women, but mainly featured, I would say the focus seemed to have more emphasis on, there were more white women that participated. So it really was kind of the genesis of this study because Paulette, she won't admit this, or yes, she would probably, went to them and said, you know what, maybe there ought to be a study on women of color in the practice of law. Now there was one done probably about 15 or 16 years ago, Invisible Invisibility, which was done, and unfortunately I think some of the results are still the same, but we decided, and she called me in, as I said, co-conspirator. She's like, okay, I'll do this with the help of Eileen. So the two of us went and were able to procure Destiny Perry, who was the writer of it, although Paulette and I were very involved in the creation of the who would participate and the study and the final review of the actual document. So to give you what we did went to Atlanta, Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York to have focus groups and have these questions asked of these women lawyers who had been out 10 years. Now, the previous study, lawyers had been out 15 years, but we were concerned that due to the lack of women in the profession, women of color in the profession, that we should probably go down to 10 years. So that's what we did. We were not as successful as we wanted with the focus groups. So we then went to an online survey and ended up with over 100 participants, about 103, which Destiny said was enough to actually have a complete survey and have a good analysis of that. So, but the results, unfortunately, are very disturbing. I mean, many have read the report, and very disturbing and disheartening. Women of color consider leaving the practice of law more than anyone else. And it's because the lack of respect, the lack of important work assignments, and isolation. We were found in the study, the results, that they had more, some of the reasons they stayed, a lot of the reasons they stayed is they had a lot of family obligations. They had a lot of debt. They were sole breadwinners. They were caretakers of other family members and support of other family members. So they also were the first to reach this achievement, the first in their family. Many families had scraped and scrimped so that their children, these women, could go to law school. And so they felt kind of an obligation to stay in the practice of law. Also, many thought they had community responsibilities because, it was important to them, it was important to their race, their culture, to speak out on behalf and stay in and become lawyers and speak to the issues that concerned women lawyers of color. And so that's another reason they stayed. And they stayed because they loved the law. Despite everything else, they loved the law, but many wanted to leave. Many needed the money. They had the debt that they had, so they stayed. So one of the other things that we found interesting, that women that are not as diverse, we found did not seem to necessarily understand the issues of women of color because they viewed it from women being a woman first, whereas women of color tend to view their race first and then being a woman secondly. So it was very interesting and very compelling. And just to give you briefly a couple of the recommendations that we came up with, is there need to be best practices for reducing bias in the profession. There need to be structural changes within the institutions. And we were very firm about that, saying structural changes, not just, kind of some sugar coatings, let's just do a few things here and there, but actually structural changes within the institutions and the law firms. There need to be mentors and sponsors that are actively engaged in the progress of these women, and not just someone that says, oh, come to this meeting, go to that meeting, but to actually want them and encourage them and help them stay in the profession, so that it's not just diversity, but it's inclusion, and so that they are very included in this. So those were some of the results. I could go on and on and on, I'm sure, and tell you more and more, but I think that's kind of a broad overview of exactly what the study was.
Can you tell people where they can find that study?
Is online, and they can go to the Commission on Women, American Bar Association Commission on Women, click on that link, and there is a link to the report.
Okay.
And we just posted in the chat.
We just linked it in the chat.
Oh, is it posted in the chat too? Okay.
Yes.
Wonderful. God, isn't technology wonderful?
It is. So that's where they can find it. It is. We're very, as I said, it's disturbing, but we're very proud of it. We're very proud of not the results, but the report.
So, just finding the women to respond to this and to be in a position to respond to your questions. Just finding the women for this panel today, it is extraordinary how few women of color there are at the top of our profession. Really extraordinary, and we all hope that this report and the people on this phone call today and this Zoom and those who are participating today will be part of the solution to this problem. So let me preface my question to you, Eileen, with a quote from Marian Wright Edelman that doesn't seem to have resonated all that much in the legal community. She has said that the biggest lessons I learned in Mississippi in the 60s were about the strength and resiliency of the human spirit and the ability of determined people to resist and overcome injustice through personal and collective will. And so when I ask you your question, Eileen, I guess in the backdrop, what's going on in my mind is, where is that personal and collective will by those who have the most power and money in our profession? And how can we, in fact, achieve what Marian Wright Edelman was alluding to? So the question to you is, after decades of practicing law with an extraordinary track record and reputation, why are women of color today, as so painfully substantiated by this study, still asked to prove themselves over and over again?
Well, let me start with a quote from the report that I think is so appropriate, that helps address that question. "The bias that I face as a woman of color has become the elephant in the room. It means that I have to keep proving myself to clients, peers, superiors, subordinates, even after each success. Sometimes others assume that I am not a threat because they don't see me as a real contender for business or leadership roles. I am not seen as a viable team member until I prove that I am. Then, even once I get buy-in from others, there are those who doubt my abilities or wait for me to fail. I feel like I have to try harder than white men. I feel like people don't give me the same tools to succeed or excel. I have to make my very own way without these tools for success, and I face adversity even when I try to be normal. Being content is not an option for me." And I think that is very telling, that I don't know why we continue to have to do that. I think part of it is that we already have the barriers when people see us, that they say, oh, especially they'll say for Black women, they'll say, oh, she's aggressive. That's kind of the, they believe that ahead of time. So then when I walk in, I say something, I'm assumed to be aggressive. And continuing to prove ourselves is an unfortunate requirement. I still have to, and I've practiced law over 40 years, but I still have these barriers where clients will say, well, tell me more about that. And I'm thinking, I sit back and I think to myself, I'm like, you wouldn't ask a white man that question. You wouldn't do it. But it's just, I think it's an intrinsic thing that people have that they can't see, that a lot of people cannot seem to overcome. And it's for some, I think it's extremely buried very deep. And if you were to tell them about themselves, they still wouldn't understand it. So I think that there to be a change, that people that now, maybe as you say, that there is hopefully some change afoot based on Black Lives Matter, although I'm a little cynical after all these years, so we'll see. But the result will be in seeing if people begin to see there are these differences, and that they appreciate that they do treat women of color differently than they treat white men.
And why, Eileen, in the practice of law itself, where does this come from? I mean,
I don't know that it's only the practice of, I hate to say, I don't think it's only the practice of law. It's just life. It's just life. We're just treated, it just doesn't matter. I mean, I think you find it across all areas. I mean, I think it's more prevalent in the law because it's such an old boys network, that it's just something that's been around, it's been around for so long, and white men still control things. I mean, if you look at the top of leadership in most firms, it's white men. So until they say, this enough is enough, till they say we've got to bring in women of color to be at that leadership, the top leadership roles, it's going to stay the same, because it's just so deep. It's so deep and so buried and so underlying and systemic, as we've been talking about systemic racism. That's what it is. And I am hopeful that, not necessarily, I don't hope to practice for another 20 years, so probably not me, but, for those that are coming up, I hope it is better. But until there are these changes, I mean, systemic changes, structural changes, that people are held accountable. Until people are held accountable, it's not going to matter. Because if corporations and other businesses continue to act the way they've been acting for all these generations, what difference will it make?
Well, do you find that within your own experience, that the kind of advice that was alluded to earlier by Noreen, that lawyers give their own corporate clients, they are not in fact themselves listening to their own advice? They are the shoemaker whose children.
I don't want to be completely cynical. I would say most are not.
And
I
why?
would say some, and I think I really do. And I hate to always put the onus and burden on corporations. I really do, but it's money. It's all about money. It really is. At the end of the day, it really is. In terms of a law firm, if that law firm has said you're no longer going to get our business because you don't have a diverse team, because you don't have diverse lawyers working on our matters, they're going to keep doing it. But once that corporation says, I'm done with you, and these are the reasons I'm done with you, and I've tried to work with you, and you have not done what I've told you to do, that's when it hits the pocketbook. That's when they will do, whether they want to or not, whether they believe in equality and being fair and treating all people the same, they'll move past that and they'll do what needs to be done.
Well, thank you, Eileen. Now, could the rest of the people on the panel put in your 2 bits? I can see you're champing at the bit, Paulette.
I am, and thank you, and I'm real pleased to be here this afternoon. But one of the things that happened, one of the reasons you asked the question about why this has to happen, the PIA effect, prove it again, prove it again, prove it again, and one of it is set forth in the Visible Invisibility report that happened in 2006. They just don't see women of color as lawyers. They just don't see us, or they don't see us at all. And so, when they can't see us, they can't understand how it is that we can do certain things. And so they constantly underestimate what our capabilities are because they can't see us in the role as lawyer. And so, and so that goes back, 400 years or so, where, where you were put into various boxes, depending on your capabilities. And even, not so far in the past, you have these situations where you can relate to various people. So you can relate to white women because they're your wives and your daughters, etc. And you can relate to men because, either they look like you or you feel like you have something in common with you. You can talk sports and so forth. But when you think about women of color, your experience with women of color may have only been your nannies or your housekeepers. And so, it's very difficult to see women in roles of authority. And I will tell you that even as president of the ABA, there were many people who came to me who thought they were paying me a compliment, who said, oh, you were so much better than I thought you would be. Or, oh,
And so articulate, so very articulate.
Yeah.
so very articulate. And, oh, you really grew into the position. I'm like, anyway, so I think, and I don't want to monopolize because I know other people would like to talk, but I think that is a part of the problem. And, and even, and sometimes it even goes down to skin tone, because, if your hue is darker, then they're even less inclined to see you as someone who's capable, who's able to do the job. It's just like in the criminal justice system, all statistics show that the darker your skin tone is, the longer your sentence is going to be.
Okay, I'm sorry, did you want to say something more? We're going to get to you in a minute with your own question, of course.
No, I'm done.
Thank you, Paulette. And I know Rosanna is going to talk directly to the issue of general counsel, having been a very seasoned general counsel for essentially her entire career. But the other 3 members of the panel, do you want to kick in here for a minute and on this particular question?
I just wanted to say, this is Miriam Kim. I'm so glad to be here. I'm with Munger, Chols and Olson, and Paulette's comments really resonated with me as an Asian American woman. I think even today, people are shocked. I mean, I'm graced with, I think, what is youthfulness here, but people are shocked when they hear I've been a lawyer for almost 20 years, and I still am asked, are you the court reporter? Or where is the partner? Or where is the lead counsel? Why isn't lead counsel here? And those questions, you just get used to them. And I think you just have to develop thick skin and realize, well, I'm going to show them. And so Paulette's comment in particular about, oral presentation, I think some people don't tend to think of Asian American women as the most dynamic speakers. And so I've had opportunities to do a lot of, public speaking through my involvement in various bar associations, and lawyers I have known for years, including some of my colleagues, will routinely come up to me afterwards and be like, I didn't know you could speak like that. I didn't know wow, like, who are you? And that's because they haven't, they have certain assumptions about what your capabilities are. And I think you've got to find those opportunities to show them what you can do.
Well, yeah, as the story that I shared with you when we talked on the phone, when the San Francisco Bar did surveys every couple of years on how our goals and timetables for minority retention were going, one of the statements made by an Asian American woman was that she was slated to be the second chair on some huge piece of litigation in her firm, but the guy who was number one chair said to his friend, I don't think I'm going to use her because, she's just too nice. But she said then it was okay because his friend said, oh, she's not really very nice at all. And she got, and she became second chair. But the different stereotypes that have been touched upon here, the stereotype for African American women, that too aggressive, for Asian American women, no fire in the belly, and in fact, the Asian American Bar in San Francisco did, as many do, big courses for younger lawyers saying how to do an interview, for example. And so they would train them, they'd have them go into the interview, and when the person came out, they would be asked, would your mother have been proud? And this Asian American friend of mine said, and if they say yes, they send them right back in, because they feel that that the cultural norms and so forth are holding people back as well. And so Laura and Rosanna, did you want to say anything briefly? I'm going to do long introductions of each of you all when we come to your question. But.
Great. So let me just quickly say that I echo from what Eileen said, the experiences, having supported two businesses in my last GC role, two Nestle businesses. I had a transition of 7 CEOs during my 11 years there. And I would say I proved myself to each and every one of them. I guess I got pretty good at it, right? But that was definitely the case. And I would say that what we have so far talked about applies outside of the law. I think Eileen, across the corporate environment, my colleagues in other departments had similar experiences of having to prove again and again. So it's not unique to lawyers.
And when we get to your separate question, Rosanna, we'll be asking a little about the power of GCs and whether or not it has been exercised, and if not, why not, and so on. Laura, you had wanted to say something.
Yeah, just one brief thing. I don't want to repeat other things, but Laura Mecklin from Seyfarth Shaw, so glad to be with you all. I think there are some unique aspects about the structure and the industry in which we work that I think in some ways can exacerbate the societal problems and the way in which the issues that we see as women of color within the legal industry play out in different ways. So I do think that in one way, we are a microcosm of the broader society in which we work, and the, sort of the framework of privilege and the way in which we interact with people every day. Many of those types of issues have already been mentioned, but also the ways in which the legal industry have always operated. I mean, for example, working in a big law firm, the fact that we measure so much of our work by literally the amount of time that we spend at work. So what does that do to caregivers? And so what does that do to caregivers who are the head of household or single parents? There's these ways in which things play out that I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about, but I've always been interested about, rather than working in our silos within one bar association or one organization, how is it that we can impact our industry as a whole to really start chipping away at some of the way in which the power dynamics and privilege dynamics impact us as lawyers. So.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, I'm going to move on now to Paulette for your question. First, an introduction. For all of these women, we could spend the entire hour and 15 minutes talking about your extraordinary track record as leaders of your institutions and leaders of the profession, but none so much as perhaps Paulette Brown. She's a co-author of course, along with Eileen and Ms. Perry, of the study that we're addressing today, as well as having had a role in a another brand new study that came out of the University of Texas about women of color in law schools and what their experiences are. Anyhow, Paulette is, of course, a past president not only of the American Bar Association and the first African-American woman and first woman of color, I believe, to be president of the American Bar Association, which is pretty, it's a sad thing for the ABA, but a happy thing that they finally got it right. She's also a past president of the National Bar Association. She is, as the face and force of the ABA, your presidency resulted in no less than 7 major diversity and inclusion policies for the profession and for the judiciary. The recipient of 3 honorary doctorates and countless other awards, Paulette is a partner at Locke Lord, a major law firm in the United States, and continues to be a dedicated and nationally acclaimed leader in efforts to achieve equality. And Paulette, before I pose the question to you, I wondered whether you could, in your answer to this question, which is, what do we, most importantly, decision makers, do to avoid having this report be yet another dust collector on the shelf, to be taken down every 5 years from now when there has still been no change? And I guess if you could, especially at a large firm like you're at, talk about the why it is that recommendations of this and so many other reports that you personally and everybody on this panel and around the country have been making to big law to make structural changes. Why is it that that those recommendations are not taken to heart by big law and truly structural changes made? And if you could possibly address directly the origination credit problem, because this study and every study where they've been frank and open, including the most recent one by Major Lindsay in Africa, showing the devastating wage gap that is widening for all women in the law between women and white men. You know, why is it that things like the origination credit system, like the unaffected subjective decision-making that is done every day in the legal profession, the kind that gives full vent to subjective racism and other forms of bias in the profession? Why is it that this profession that tells its clients, do a survey, find out where your pay gap's out, find out where the segregation within the walls is going on, and then structure objective structures and so on to deal with that? Why is it that this is not happening in the law?
So you're asking me for the secret sauce, Drew.
Yes.
And I don't know that I have a secret sauce. I can tell you this, that the origination fee has a number of different issues. So when you talk about a large firm like mine, for example, you have institutional clients. And many times when you have someone young, up and coming like Laura or Miriam, even Eileen, all of you are younger than I am, so I can say that. When you bring in a new piece of business, that because people know that you get credit and your compensation is based on the amount of money that you generate for the firm, even if the firm never did that type of work, the people who are doing work for the company say, oh, that's my client. And it has to come through me. And so what has happened, though, gratefully, with some companies, they are now saying, if this is a brand new piece of work and I am asking Miriam to do it, then Miriam has to get the origination credit for it. And I think that that is kind of what it's going to take. But I think that from a long-term perspective, I don't think that firms have really come to realize, because people think in such individual ways instead of more communal ways, more in terms of community. They think so much as an individual, they have a hard time grasping that when someone else is successful, they too will be successful. That success breeds success. And so, you know, until they stop thinking about themselves as an individual rather than an organization, you're going to continue to have these problems. So I think that firms need to understand how to build community, and understand that, especially in a direction where we're going now, because, corporations are more and more coming to the realization that they are consumers. I am paying for something, and because I'm paying for something, that I can make demands on what I get for my money. And so I think the more that you see this, the more people understand that, that they're not going to be able to survive if they don't do things differently. But I think that that's really not enough. I think that people who are really serious about it, they will go back and look at their history to see what type of patterns have developed over time and make an assessment as to, we think that we've done everything fairly. We think that our policies look fair on their face, but the impact of them, it's just not true. So I think that in order not to have this happen 5 years from now, because I'll long be retired in 5 years. Oh yeah, I'll be 70 my next birthday. It's time for me.
You're just a kid.
Youngsters carry on. But I think that unless you look at what you've done in your past, then you're destined to continue to repeat the bad mistakes that you've been making all along. So
Paulette, do you know of any firm that has actually done the kind of audit that was done, for example, by Salesforce and by a few other corporations that were alluded to earlier by Noreen, to actually do, for example, a wage audit of their own law firm?
So Laura can say, and I do know that there are a couple of firms, if they haven't done it, some are definitely in the process of doing it now.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that that's one step, and Laura can really talk to it better than I can about exactly how the process is working. But I think that, doing an assessment of that is just one piece of it, because that's sort of saying, okay, yes, there's this problem, but then what do you do with the information afterwards? That's the thing. And how do you hold people accountable so that it won't continue to happen? And I think that, there've been a lot of studies, what works, the carrot or the stick, and all the analytics say that the stick works the best. But I think that, as an initial matter, you got to warn people that this is coming, and so, we may reward you if you do a lot better, but, we can't continue along this path. If in order to make sure our firm continues to exist 100 years from now, we're going to have to make structural changes.
Well, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Okay, feedback from the other panelists on this particular issue. I know, Laura, you had something to say, and we'll get to this more when we get to you, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, we have in the past done, pay audits, and we audit on a number of different levels. And actually, we have a pay equity group at our firm that represents employers that actually represent other law firms that are doing this. We obviously can't disclose names of that, but it's been really great to see that has sort of caught, some traction, where we have a couple of law firm clients that have recommended other law firm clients saying, hey, we have an in-house, team of economists that can help do that. But that said, there's a lot of other structural changes. It's one thing to audit and then, point the finger at what the problem is. But, to Paulette's point, what gets you to the results of changing what, those audits might reveal in certain organizations. And, I think that you look at credit, you look at the ways in which you are just overall performance factors. And so, some things that we've done in our firm, and I know other firms are really leading in some of these areas, but we've broken down credit into different categories. So you're measuring different behaviors. So not only is it origination, did I bring this client to the firm, but we're also measuring around management credit, and proliferation credit is what we talk about. And some other firms have up to, 6 and 7 categories of these things. But we're looking at proliferation being in the current state this year, who brought new work from a client to the firm. So it's matter by matter, as well as who's actually in a first chair capacity doing this work. Who does the client want to manage this matter and be leading it as the thinking attorney day to day. And I think those things are important, in addition to so many other structural things that we could do in law firms.
did you want to do a quick comment, Miriam and Rosanna? But I'm going to be introducing you, Rosanna, in a minute. So you'll be the next one. But so Miriam, you're on mute. There.
No, in the interest of time, why don't we go on?
Okay. Thank you so much for that discussion. Let me next introduce Rosanna Nagel. She is now of counsel at Cobblitz, Patch, Duffy and Bass, a blue chip firm here in San Francisco, and actually President Clinton's go-to firm for, it seemed like, every federal judge in town. She has served for 20 years as a general counsel at global food, beverage, and apparel companies, including, as she mentioned earlier, Nestle's Dryers and Nespresso United States, Cliff Bar and Company, and Levi Strauss's Europe, Africa, and Middle East division, where she was in, I guess, Brussels. And prior to that, she has been a leader in all kinds of diversity-oriented organizations, as has everyone really on this panel, but particularly active in the California Minority Council Program, which is near and dear to my heart, and currently as board chair of the Centro Legal de la Raza. And I guess after I pose this question, if you could especially address the fact that there have been many initiatives by general counsel groups, which law firms flock to join, that are to enlist general counsel and law firm leadership in trying to diversify law firms and promote the fortunes of women of color and other groups that have been stopped at the gate. So the emphasis obviously on the general counsel as consumer is and the customer here is really the question. And I think that there is the feeling on the part of some lawyers that general counsel, you know, like Athena on the mountain, can just throw down a bolt of lightning and make a firm change, whether they want to or not, with the threat, as was mentioned earlier, of just going somewhere else. When Guy Rounsville was the general counsel of Wells Fargo, he did ditch a firm in the way that was discussed earlier, and it was like the shot heard around the world in San Francisco. But it doesn't seem as if that happens as much as it should, despite even the newest initiatives that we have. So my question to you then, Rosanna, is that general counsel are the major consumers. And as such, which of the ABA recommendations for increasing diversity can, should, and do you think will general counsel use to try to influence what's happening in law firms and to move the needle for women of color in our profession? And what are some of the barriers to being as effective as some people think any general counsel could and should be?
Okay, well, it's a big topic, right? And we've touched a little bit on it already. And I'll just, second and agree that it's really important for a general counsel to understand and push for transparency on the diversity and metric goals that their firms are using. These are important numbers to look at and understand and really give you insight into how a firm operates its business. And as we've talked about, there needs to be structural change in a lot of areas for things to change for women of color. But when I think about my own in-house career, the one ABA recommendation that resonates most strongly with me is the one that's focused on improving access to effective mentors and sponsors. And there are a couple of reasons for that. First, the importance of having effective mentors and sponsors is key to success, whether you're outside counsel or whether you're in-house as a GC. And I think the opportunity here is that a GC can be a partner to the firm in providing more opportunities for effective mentorship and sponsorship for the legal team that supports their business. And just kind of going back to something that was mentioned earlier, the reality is that a GC steps into a role and typically has a panel or a set of law firms that are seen by their business as trusted legal advisors. They become trusted legal advisors because they've had a track record of success, because the company has invested in them, they know their business, and they've succeeded in the matters that they've handled. it is, in my experience, quite difficult to make a change like that when you have that reality before you. But I think the second piece is that that reality is, how do you help more diverse and women of color become that trusted legal advisor? How do you help mentor and sponsor them? How do you build that pipeline? Because clearly we haven't done a particularly good job in this generation, right? We don't have a bench of trusted legal advisors that are women of color. And I think that goal is a key to success, because a business client has got to feel comfortable that their lawyer, whether you're outside or GC, understands the business nuances and is able to effectively navigate the intersection of the legal issue with the reality of the business. And that takes time in the chair, and it's a long path. So the GC, I think, typically has a trusted legal advisor, the data would tell us, that is white and is a male. That's the overwhelming people of power have those gender and race characteristics. I think the GC can take an opportunity to work with their outside counsel and say, hey, we've got to move from a business of a relationship partner where you're the face of the firm to a relationship team. And quite frankly, that mirrors how most in-house legal departments function. As GC, it's sort of the other flip of the coin. It's not an individual role, it's a team. Your team is doing things collectively and individually, but you function as a team. And I think that learning is something that law firms could really benefit from. And so you as a GC have to push your relationship partner to build a relationship team. And not only that is diverse, and to work on diversity if that's an issue, but gives the team meaningful opportunities for client interactions that helps them find their voice, build their leadership style, and grow their confidence. Because that's how you get to become a trusted legal advisor. It isn't something you can read a book about. You have to have time in the chair and ability to fail forward.
Can I ask you, Rosanna, to address also what you and I have talked about on the phone, and that is, what about the necessity of the CEO of the corporation caring about any of this?
Well, and I think obviously that's going to be individual, right, to some extent, but I think it was mentioned earlier, I think you're seeing a change in corporate cultures. More and more companies are taking on a broader view about what does my supply chain of vendors look like, and what is the diversity of my supply chain. And the legal department is part of that supply chain. So you're seeing more and more CEOs, and I would say this is in the last couple of years, right? You're seeing more and more CEOs push their general counsels to look at the diversity of the vendors, their law firms, and move those numbers. So I think the interest is becoming more widespread than I would say, certainly that I saw in early in my career. So the landscape is changing, but it's early, right? And so I think it's time for general counsels to move into the position of being that client mentor and support the legal team that supports them with opportunities. And I'll give you a couple of examples, because I think there's a lot of low hanging fruit. It requires a cultural change in the firm and a willingness to turn the mic over to other people, which is sometimes a challenge. But you can have your more junior lawyers or junior partners, certainly diverse, do 30-minute lunch and learns for your legal team. Present, let them do it. Pick a topic that's helpful for the business. One that we did a lot and over again was having our business clients understand the nature of the attorney-client privilege. You don't need to be a 25-year partner to do that. You could be a 5th-year associate, and you'll learn how to present. You'll get better at your communication style, and it'll grow your confidence. we used to, I used to push my relationship partners on matters where we'd already set the strategy to turn the mic over in ongoing phone calls around tactics or status updates to the more junior members of that team. Again, it's both a function of cost, right? Why am I going to pay for the senior partner to tell me? But it's also an opportunity that if you don't have the ongoing dialogue with your relationship partner about we're going to do this together, you're going to push and build your team, and I'm going to push you to do that. It may not happen. And the last thing is just as an example is when I was at Levi Strauss in Europe, we had an annual or semi-annual meeting with our key outside counsel where my legal team, I did very little talking. My legal team presented all of the different business strategies that were short-term and medium-term, because obviously the long-term ones typically evolved and never came to fruition. So we focused on the short and medium terms. I let my team members do that presentation, and our outside counsel brought not just the relationship partner, but other members of the team, and they provided insights on legal landscape changes or issues that were impacting our business. And it became a dialogue. People were allowed to fail forward. And you didn't, we created over the 3 years I was there, a pretty safe environment, a collegial environment, where the goal was for them to learn about my business, but also an opportunity for the team to grow together. So
one more minute, Rosanna.
Yeah, okay, so for me, that mentorship opportunity is something that can and should be a dual responsibility. I don't think the GC holds the ability, quite frankly, in most situations to snap their fingers and change their firms. I think the GC has the ability to look at that pipeline and enable the law firm and push the law firm to build a more diverse pipeline.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Miriam, I'm going to move on to you. Miriam is a partner elected while working part-time, no less, at Munger, Tolles & Olson, a firm that under President Obama seemed to appoint every federal judge in San Francisco. A complex civil litigator, past president of the Asian American Bar, named one of the best lawyers under 40. She is the leader of the firm's partner compensation committee, which, as we know, is where the rubber hits the road. She's a community and professional leader, including having been the past co-chair of the lawyer representatives of the Northern District of California Court. And I wanted to, just before I pose this question to you, Miriam, to say that I know that the backlash for not conforming to the stereotype of somebody with no fire in the belly can often bring on a lot of pressure. There's that old line about a man has to be an axe murderer to be called ruthless. All a woman has to do is put you on hold. But I wondered, Peter Zeughauser does a lot of consulting for big firms. So the committees like the one you are on, not necessarily your firm, but those kinds of committees, he said, are veritable petri dishes of bias, where the level of ignorance and bias is alarming. And I wondered, how did you, as probably one of the very few women of color on that kind of a powerful committee, how did you deal with those kinds of issues, and how can women of color within firms that really do reach positions like this, that have some real power, do it without jeopardizing their own career?
Yeah, so our firm is pretty unique in terms of our partner compensation process, for good or bad. So it may not be the best comparison for many folks attending. We have a system that's democratic. So each partner votes on how much they think each other partner should make. So it's a very different system. It's not formulaic. In that way, it's probably contrary to all of the advice of social scientists about, combating implicit bias. On the other hand, it's a fully transparent system. So you can see what each and every other partner has voted for you, and you can go to them and talk to them about why. And so we encourage dialogue among our 90 or so partners to talk in advance of, your year and what do you think each person should make and why? And even if it's a challenging conversation and you think someone hasn't carried their weight, you go and talk to them and explain to them why you are probably going to be their low number this year. And those can be extremely excruciating conversations, especially for a woman of color who hasn't had to deal with talking about money most of their life. Because for me, like, making money was never something my parents taught us about or ingrained in us, and it was not a value that they tried to cultivate in us. But I like the transparency, because if you're going to see bias, it's hard to hide it, right? It almost becomes explicit bias at that point. And so that is the probably the most powerful check that we have on our system. And every year we go through discussions about whether we should just get rid of it because it's so painful to have those conversations. And should we move to a model similar to other firms where they're trying to implement more objective standards? But that has its own disadvantages, as we've heard, because how do you decide who gets the credit for this and that? That being said, like, when I've been in that room and been so privileged to be in the room with my partners talking about compensation decisions, what I try to do in my role is to, like, present the facts, right? Because we don't have a formulaic process, well, then let me look at the worked value. Let me look at, you know, who's bringing in bringing in the money, or where did these relationships derive from, and try to get some of that information and interrupt what I see as inaccurate facts. Because sometimes people assume, oh, well, that relationship came in because, you know, of so-and-so. And then I can dig back, and I'm very anal at keeping emails. So I will go back in my email records and say, no, that's incorrect. So-and-so told us that actually that business came in through this, you know, this Asian American partner who got the phone call. And so I think making sure I'm like the historian who has the factual records and can combat the misinformation and inaccurate assumptions about who is doing what has been most helpful.
Miriam, has your firm done a survey of compensation in the firm, of throughout the firm, not just the partners, but the associates that was talked about a little bit earlier?
You know, I don't think we've done a formal pay audit, but, you know, I have not been involved in our associate salary in the last few years, so I'm not sure. But we certainly, at the end of the process, what happens for our process is, you know, all the partners vote, and then the committee, you know, is looking at the numbers and makes some adjustments. But basically, we're going with what the partnership has decided based on information they've gathered from the committee. And so we sit back and we do explicitly look at, like, where are the women, you know, let's just look at the women now and see where they are, and why are they where they are, and did we miss something here? Is there something wrong in the system? Did the partners not have certain information that we have? And then we you know, exercise our judgment to make adjustments.
Okay, thank you. And does anybody want to jump in for a minute or two on this issue, including, of course, the kind of, you know, who hands out the work, who decides who gets the sexy cases, who decides, you know, the structural kind of informality or the non-structure in many firms on that, that then allows someone to show their stuff and rack up the hours and so on. Does anybody want to speak to that at all from the other panelists?
I can talk very briefly on that. I mean, I think some of that structural change is, you know, it's obviously so necessary. I think the issue, and one of the panelists, I don't know if it was Eileen or Paulette, mentioned at the very beginning that I think where we've been with, you know, IED, inclusion, equity, and diversity initiatives, at least in law firms for a very long time, was that it was a bit of window dressing, frankly. It was every firm wanted to say that they did it, but there wasn't ever the meaningful work being done that actually led to real life changes in how firms operated. And I think the problem there is that even well-intentioned people, I mean, frankly, you know, I can think 5 and 10 years back when I first got involved in our diversity initiatives at our firm. very well-intentioned partners would have told you that what we were doing was right and that in fact they believed passionately about it. You know, it's great to have all the intention in the world, but to really change those structures in an organization, it takes a lot of very detailed, hands-on, you know, intense work where you literally have to peel back each and every process that you have in the firm to understand how does this impact different people, how does it operate, you know, and really understand how you might be able to make process changes or, you know, what other, I mean, any number of other types of substantive changes. So, you know, we have a free market system for associate assignments, but a lot of us for years have been saying that's ridiculous because what is that going to lead to? It's going to lead to, you know, the wrong people having the right assignments or too many, you know, of certain types of people having all the best assignments and all of this that we're always worried about. So we put in place basically a quarterly talent review where we literally have every department chair and the talent people sit down and talk through every associate every quarter, where we have to look at what are the kinds of assignments they're getting, what are we reporting back? Is anyone withering on the vine? Like, are we, you know, so it takes this like awareness and detail that, you know, frankly, you know, I'm not saying we have a lot of stuff to learn from, and that process itself could even be like flawed. But when we were taking a look at how might we combat against some of these things that are so, you know, clearer to people working in the I&D community that could be flawed, you know, how do we try to rectify that? And that was like the one solution that we could figure out. So maybe there's a better way of doing it, but for right now, we have to do that detailed work. And there may be 100 other things that firms would need to do of that type.
Let me now formally introduce you. Laura Mecklin is National Chair of the Labor and Employment Department and on the Executive Committee at Save Our Shaw, a former chair and continuing leader of the California Minority Council Program. She's past president of the National LGBTQ Bar Association. She is a prominent class action litigator and national speaker and writer on diversity and inclusion in the law, and a longtime and prolific contributing editor of numerous ABA and BNA editions. And the question to you is, why is a report like this necessary to address the all-important intersectional issues in diversity within the law? And where does intersectionality really play, and why does it play such an important role in the experience of women of color, especially in the law? And I did want, if you would, one of the findings of this study that is particularly sensitive, I think, is that generally there was a feeling that white women have been the primary beneficiaries of the diversity and inclusion efforts of law firms, and that white women are less interested even than white men, and certainly than men of color, in pursuing how to advance women of color in the firm. And so I wondered if you might include some comments on that when you're addressing this question of intersectionality, and maybe a definition of it so that it isn't just a jargon word here.
Yeah, I mean, so, and I think, you know, Paulette and Eileen talked a little bit in the beginning about, you know, sort of the importance of this study following a whole host and variety of other studies that talked about, you know, women in the profession. We've also seen, you know, studies with a singular dimension in many other contexts where they're looking at, you know, I mean, I've been part of or, you know, contributed to LGBTQ people in the profession. It's like, you know, that's, you know, those can be very important, and it sheds light on important issues. But what I thought was so insightful, and why I'm so thankful that the, you know, contributors and the authors of this study focused on this is, you know, looking at this concept of intersectionality. So the way I look at it is that it is different aspects of culture and identity that basically interconnect to create a person's holistic experience. And so when you're looking at it within the diversity, inclusion, and belonging, you know, of where you're trying to create that within an industry or within your organization, it's important to understand all of those different ways in which somebody may experience their reality and have a lived experience in sort of how they're pursuing and experiencing their career. And so, to me, this was so important and it was fascinating actually to not only read the findings, but it was really meaningful to read the commentary, the quotes that were in this report, because they talked in so many different ways of a lived experience of people that experience bias or sort of negative impact of their identity, but in different ways and in overlapping ways, right? And so it's almost that the issues of intersectionality can exacerbate certain ways in which people experience bias or hurdles within our profession. So when you're feeling like you're the one and only, if you're the one and only woman and you're also the one and only person of color in a situation, what kinds of burdens or weight might you feel in a particular situation, or when you're navigating a feeling of invisibility or not being heard, and the mental process it takes to figure out why. It's like, well, is that because I'm a woman and they're looking at me because I'm the woman, or is it because they know that I'm Latina? I joke around with people, and I didn't coin this phrase, but I'm a 4L, so a lady, lesbian, Latina lawyer. And so in my mind, I'm thinking like, what's, it's not the lawyer part, but it's like, what's the L that's like the problem here, that they didn't question my white straight male colleague about something, but they're questioning me about why I might have a rationale behind something, or why I'm pushing a particular initiative, or whatever is happening. It's in my head wondering, why, or somehow I'm not being heard, or I'm not being called on to speak. So why is that? So, I just thought that this report, and frankly, I would love to see more of them in the future. I'm not putting any, work on anyone's plate by suggesting that, but the importance of having these frameworks to be able to show these stories is just so incredibly important.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak to that? And also, if anybody's willing to take up this issue of white women, I thought that was a very interesting finding in that report, and what advice you'd give white women who really, according to the report and in real life, that it's measuring, are part of the problem, apparently.
So I can speak to that. I mean, I think in my experience, I don't view my white partners as the problem. I think what I've seen is that my white male partners see their daughters in my white female colleagues. And I think they have, in many cases, like they literally have daughters in law school who are going through those same experiences, so they can connect with them in that way. And I mean, I'm happy for that. I'm very glad for that. And I think, unfortunately, as a result, some firms are taking diversity credit for, including the women. And we do that too, right? And so they're counting not just lawyers of color, they're counting women and lawyers of color. And so then when you look closely, like in our firm is, in the same boat as everyone else. We don't have enough Black lawyers. We don't have enough, Latino lawyers, and we don't have enough women of color lawyers. And so I think what I would like to push firms to do, and what I've been a beneficiary of, is how do you interrupt bias at the individual level? Because once you get to the senior associate ranks, there's so few women of color to begin with. So for those 2 or 5 or 10, however many you have in your firm, like it's not that many folks. So assign powerful partners who can work with them, teach them what they need to become a partner, help them go to trial with someone powerful so that partner can really get to know what their potential is and see what they can do in a courtroom in front of a diverse jury. Give them a business development coach. If you're a GC, give them an opportunity to do a case for a pro se lawyer. Let them work part-time when they have kids. I mean, go to their door and just talk to them and get to know them. Invite them to your house for dinner. These are like small things that can be done with a very small group at your firm, and that I think are just being left out and left behind because people are not taking the time to do that. And I mean, I am a real life example. All those examples I gave you are things that my firm has done for me over the course of my career. And I wouldn't be here if that had not happened. Right. Like, I just wouldn't. I would have chosen my family. I would have chosen another path.
Thank you. I think Eileen and Paulette, I think you both wanted to, you have 1 minute, and then we're going to go to some questions, I think.
Well, I'll be quick since we have so little time, but I do think that not only what Miriam said, that they see themselves, that the white men see white women as their daughters, sisters, that kind of, and mothers, but I do think there is a difference, that I do think that white women, they have different experiences than women of color. I mean, they just do. And I think one thing, I have a couple of very enlightened friends who lawyers, who I shared the report with, white women, who are very good friends, who were taken aback at what was in the study. They just didn't know. And I think that's part of it. I think white women, a lot of times, it's not intentional, but there is a difference. I mean, there's just, as I said initially, women of color see their color, they come in the room and other people see their color first, and they think about their color first before necessarily think about them being a woman. White women walk in the room, they may be seen as a woman, but they don't have that double edge. They don't have that double whammy, so to speak, and we do. And so I think that's kind of the difference between white women. Sometimes a lot of them just don't get it. And so that's sometimes the disconnect, I think, between white women and women of color.
And Paulette, I think you wanted to,
yeah, the thing, always, when I think about, which is why I asked that this report be done, is because whenever you talk about a study about women or a study about, disparity in women, it's generally about white women. And so a classic example is that when you look at the study, they're complaining about there only, 25% of women who are equity partners. Well, there are 2% of women of color who are equity partners, and 0.75% of Black women who are equity partners. And so, I don't think that people understand, unless you point it out to them, that there is a huge distinction and difference between women of color and white women. And even within the women of color are not a monolith either. That there are different issues that are presented depending upon, that Miriam pointed out, for example, what the expectations are of each one of those groups. And so, whereas Miriam will be considered as docile, I'm going to be considered as extremely aggressive and maybe even off-putting, even if I make a suggestion about something. And so it's sometimes difficult for people to, sort of listen to, or, they interpret it kind of in a different way. They see you in a different light than they see other people. And I've also had, because I've had a women of color mentoring group for like 14 years now. And one of the persistent things that a lot of women of color didn't understand is, like, they think that as a woman, you're supposed to support all women. And they could not understand why white women did not support them at all. So, I think that it requires some real courageous conversations among all of the different groups for us to really get past that and understand that when we talk about women, we need to be talking about all women.
And let me just, real quick, I want to build on that with, I think, and just trying to have an optimistic, as we look forward, I think the opportunity in this moment is for us to take white women and men as allies, right? Because there are many out there who I think want to do something different, and they need to understand the how to do that. And by sharing our collective experiences, by sharing the data, by opening their eyes to see that there is a huge disparity in representation as you move through the nuances of women, I think you can find some allies in this moment and build on the moment we all are in. So that 5 years from now or 10 years from now, when our daughters and sons are on this panel, they can show a difference in the numbers versus where we are today. Because otherwise, if we don't engage those folks in power, the needle's not going to move.
I think we should engage people in power, but I think that, you know, there are performative allies and there are other allies. And so, you know, I'm an optimistic person too, maybe not so much on this particular day, but generally I am an optimist. But, you know, I think that it's a lot of work, and I don't think
It's a lot of work.
around the fact that it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
We have a question here from Susanna Delano to all panelists. She said she'd love to hear thoughts on disparities between the number of male attorneys groomed and encouraged to run for office versus women and women of color who are lawyers. For example, in our state legislature, we're losing a fabulous legal champion in Hannah Beth Jackson, who's been extraordinary. And we need more women, and especially women of color with legal expertise to run. And I wondered what people's response to that might be. Have any of you been approached to run for office? For example, Paulette, I would wager that an awful lot of the men, white men who have been president of the ABA have been asked to run for office. Have you? And if not, why not?
And so there are some people who have suggested it to me, but I have to tell you that the only thing I want to run for is cover.
No, anyone else want to address that? Have any of the other leaders here been approached to run for office? Have you thought about running for office where you can exert change not only in our own profession, but in the broader society? I guess.
Here's another question though. Let's see, Dewey.
Yeah,
There's a
okay.
question from Dewey.
Okay, let's see. How would you advise, well, let's see, which one of these is the best one? How would you advise the way forward in a country where money and color has continued to be the measure of our institutional norms and operations and success? Anyone want to tackle that one?
I think that one thing that we can't do is we can't sit on the sidelines and talk from the sidelines. I think that we have to find a way to not just to get to the table, but also offer your voice once you get at the table. But don't waste the seat. But I think that we don't have the luxury of sitting on the sidelines and being silent about things. That we have to inject ourselves into the process. And as Rosanna talked about, if you fail, you fail forward, you know, but you don't lose anything as a result of trying.
Noreen, I think you had a question, and then you're going to do the wrap up in a few minutes, but what's your question?
I just can't resist having all of these great women leaders in front of me. Thank you all. I mean, I've just been taking notes, and really, I have so many people from the legal profession that come to me all the time and come to equal rights advocates all the time. And I'm so grateful for all of the practices that you're sharing that, you know, weren't on my list, which are really interesting and probably really just compelling in terms of the work. And the question I have, and Miriam, I was just sort of reminded when you were talking about the compensation committee, the team that's looking at compensation. And, you know, I had a colleague, a friend who said, yeah, that's the committee that I think I need to get on if I really want to know what's going on in my firm. And so there's a lot, we've got like hundreds of people, dozens of people on listening. If you're speaking to a woman of color at a big firm right now, what are the committees that they should be angling to get into? There's only one managing attorney, right? So, but what are the committees that really reveal things that are be important for women of color within the firm to know and to influence with, you know, with their perspective of their own experience?
You're on mute, Mary.
I think the compensation committee is by far the most illuminating as a partner, right? Just in terms of, you know, like Eileen said, it's about the money, right? So we are a business, so we're a for-profit business. So what are we looking at? So anything else related to the money, if you have a finance committee or if there's a management committee with extensive, you know, authority over a budget, Also, I've been on the associate review committee. So what goes into deciding who will make partner, right? There are certain discussions in our firm that happen in that committee that don't extend to the broader partnership. And so you'll see, like, what are people saying? And it's not just illuminating to know how you can advise your mentees. It's also important to be there so you can interrupt the bias, make sure there's bias training for the reviewers and all the partners. We do that before every review season. All partners, you know, they're offered implicit bias training because we don't want to collect biased reviews. It's just pointless.
If you do get,
I would say, oh,
okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, I totally agree with Miriam that I think finance and management committee, I think that also not only looking for the women of color to be on those committees, but those that are not on those committees that are of color, seeing who's on those committees is very critical. Because if you see that it's just all white men and you're a person of color and you're trying to rise in the ranks or get promotions or become partner, and all you see are white men on the committee, you already think that you're not going to get there, right? But if you see that there's some women of color on these important committees and not just on, and I don't make light of pro bono committee, and because I think those are very important, and the diversity committee, those are critical. But if we're talking about powerful committees, then you need to be on management and finance, and other women need to see that you're on there so that they can aspire and know that they have a chance to make
I mean, let me ask you, you know, there have been only in the past few years some lawsuits that have gotten at the black, they call it the black box, you know, since time immemorial, these kinds of powerful committees being almost entirely white men. And these lawsuits are focused straight at that. Do you think that these lawsuits will have any kind of an impact? I was wondering what all of you all thought.
Well, I'm not a labor and employment lawyer, so I'd probably pass it off to them, but I would think those things are kind of, somewhat subjective. I mean, how do you get to saying that you can't have these people on a committee, that you have to have, it's an internal process, but I would defer to that to say, I know Paulette and Laura are both labor law employment and lawyers, so they might speak better to that. I would think it would be hard to get to really have those be successful, but that's just my opinion.
Interesting. Did you have a comment on that, Paulette? You looked like you did.
I'm deferring to Laura.
Okay, Laura, you're up.
Well, I can certainly, I mean, so I think Eileen's comments are right. I mean, I don't know that those lawsuits will get to the formation of committees or sort of, I mean, I guess who's on them could lend optics to those kinds of lawsuits, which is, you know, certainly an issue that you're battling against when you're in litigation, because it's not just the merits of and the defenses of the litigation, but the optics to your own talent, to internally how your firm's perceived, including by clients. That's a major issue that you know, firms, I think, worry about with those kinds of suits, even if there is not merit to the suit. Getting to the broader issues you all were talking about, I mean, I would also say, I mean, people may look at this panel and say, oh, geez, well, there are all these, you know, successful women here, and they're saying I should try to get on the management committee, but that's, you know, that's 5 years or 10 years from now in terms of me really understanding, you know, how I can influence in my organization. But I think to women who are in the pipeline and may not be looking at being on a committee right away, you know, I was shocked when I got into leadership roles within my firm and then came onto some of these committees about the type and the number, the type of people that feel very free to ask questions about my job and what I'm doing and want to know everything about the committee. And then how often they feel willing to take my time to ask those questions. Most often, that's majority men who contact me to say, tell me everything about what you're doing, educate me, let me know, like, you know, I have 101 questions and there's no concern. And of course, I mentor many people in the organization. I'm not going to ever tell anyone no. But what was striking to me was that I wasn't getting those questions from all the women of color associates. Mm-hmm. And so I think that one really powerful thing to do as well is if you're in a pipeline and it's something that you're interested in, or you want to know about how your firm works or how you can get promoted to partner, is don't, you know, sit back and just ask questions of your peers. go to your leaders and see if they have an open door and ask the questions and ask how it works and say what happens at the table. A lot of us would be transparent about, you know, these are the things we think about, and at least explain it so you have that context.
Thank you so much. I want to thank, we're running out of time. I want to thank all of our panelists who have been absolutely magnificent, and I think it really laid bare some of the really profound problems in our profession. And so I want to kick it back over to Noreen to wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, pardon to say what can we do, but I just was, and I will talk to the panelists after. I'm just wondering if there is a cross-firm network through which people share these amazing practices, and if not, it would be something we'd be really interested in looking at with some of our big firm colleagues and some of you. You know, there's so many things that we can do. There's incredible suggestions that are in the report and others by the ABA about how we can improve big law. And if you want to join some of the things that Equal Rights Advocates is working on, we have a action team that's open to everyone. We've got representation from every state in the country about some of the policy work we're doing, executive action work we're doing. It lets you engage in a really easy way and follow the issues that we care about, including in law. If you want to support the work of Equal Rights Advocates, we love that too. You can just go to equalrights.org/donate, and that's a great place to show your passion for gender, racial, and economic justice through a gift to ERA. We really rely on great support and sisterhood and friendship from people across the legal profession. We've got a couple of other big events that are happening. After this one, October 1, I'm going to be talking to just leading feminists in business, how they're showing up for racial justice and gender justice in this moment, including in this moment of this pandemic, and that's October 1st. We'll be talking to, our speakers include Suzanne Lerner, who is the CEO of Michael Stars Apparel, and Molly Ford, who is the Chief Global Diversity Officer at Salesforce. So that'll be a great conversation. So tune in, get your clients to tune in about that. And then you see on your screen the fabulous Megan Rapinoe, who's going to be one of our featured guests at our gala on November 13th. In addition to this marvelous executive director, I mean, this marvelous board of directors chair, Drew Raymond, who's also going to be honored. So we'd love for you to join us as a sponsor, as an individual, help us build community at this moment. It will be right after the elections, so we'll all be needing to come in together in community no matter what the result of that election is. So thank you again to Drew for a fabulous moderation and preparation of this event, and to all of our guests. Fantastic report, amazing insights, and I look forward to continuing the conversations throughout the year. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.